no one ever listened to me until I dared to speak in my own language. Amara Johnson was just a regular black girl. She worked nights as a waitress in a luxury restaurant to survive, and during the day, she studied languages, dreaming of one day going to France. Then, one night, she spoke to her mother in French, just a quiet phone call, but in front of the wrong person, a billionaire known for his racist views. The next morning, she was fired. It could have ended there, but that simple phone call set off a chain of events that would shake everything. She was publicly shamed, her scholarship revoked, her future torn apart. But through the ashes of that injustice, she uncovered something bigger, a powerful secret, one that tied back to the same man who tried to silence her. No one thought a young black woman, a waitress, could stand up to an empire, but she didn't need power. She had the truth. And when she spoke, the world finally listened. This is a story about silent power, about dignity, about truth, and about the courage to stand alone when everyone else looks away. Before we begin this story, let us know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow's story will move you even deeper. At Le Chateau, the most luxurious restaurant nestled in the heart of Dallas. Everything sparkled from the champagne glasses to the polished shoes of the men who hadn't checked a price tag in years. The lighting was warm, flattering, designed to hide imperfections and exaggerate elegance. Every detail spoke of wealth and exclusivity. Yet, in the corner of the dining room, moving silently between tables, was someone who didn't belong to that world, yet knew it intimately. Her name was Amara Johnson. She wore the same uniform as the other servers, crisp white shirt, black apron, low bun, but something about her felt different. She was the only black woman on the team. Not that anyone said it out loud. They didn't have to. The way they ignored her was enough. They called her sweetheart when they needed a table cleaned, or hey you when they forgot her name, which was often. But Amara remembered every name, every preference, every note scribbled in her own little mental journal. She was invisible, but she paid attention. While the other servers giggled and slipped each other flirty glances in the break room, Amara sat alone, reading from a worn paperback in French. While they joked about TikToks and dating apps, she translated Camus and Senghor under her breath. No one knew she was a top student at Southern Methodist University. No one knew she spoke French, German, and a growing command of Arabic. No one knew she worked 2 jobs, sent money home, and still submitted every essay before deadline. No one cared. Because in that place, a world of soft jazz and crystal chandeliers, Amara was not supposed to be anything more than silent, swift, and servile. Just a pair of hands that refilled glasses and disappeared. But she had always been more. When she looked at herself in the mirror each night, after scrubbing off the scent of garlic and wine, she whispered the same words her mother used to tell her, "They won't see you, but you must always see yourself." And so she did, quietly, fiercely, without apology. That Friday night, the tension in the restaurant was palpable. The private dining room had been reserved for an exclusive oil investment summit. The guest of honor, Charles Whitmore, Billionaire, media darling, and a man whose political donations and polarizing statements had made him a walking storm cloud. The staff had been briefed twice: serve quickly, stay silent, and under no circumstances offend Mr. Whitmore. Amara had served him before. She knew his eyes didn't scan menus. They scanned people, judged them, measured who was worth his time. She moved with precision that night, weaving between high-backed chairs and tables lined with white linen. Her shoes barely made a sound on the tile floor. She placed a decanter of Bordeaux near Whitmore's elbow, gave the required half-smile, and turned to leave when her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She froze. Personal calls during shift hours were forbidden, but something about the tone of the vibration, 2 short pulses, then a pause told her it was her mother. Their code for urgent. With a glance toward the manager busy polishing a wine glass, Amara took one cautious step back from the table and answered quietly. Allô? Maman. Je suis au travail. Tu peux m'appeler plus tard? Hi, Mom. I'm at work. Can you call me later? Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it was enough. Whitmore looked up slowly, like a man sensing a fly in his wine. What the hell did you just say? Amara, calm but alert, replied. I was speaking French. Sir, it was my mother. Whitmore scoffed. French? Why, you trying to show off? You think this is Europe or something. Speak English. You're in America. Amara's heart didn't race. It sank deep and steady like an anchor dropped in black water. She'd expected judgment in that room, but not confrontation. Not a man offended by her existence in a language he didn't understand. She didn't apologize. She didn't respond. She simply ended the call, nodded once, and walked away without breaking stride. But she knew that moment had changed something, and the real storm hadn't even started. Amara didn't cry in the locker room. She didn't slam her phone down or march to the manager's office demanding fairness. No, she folded her apron like she always did, washed her hands for a full 30 seconds, and slipped out the back door into the cool night air. Dallas was buzzing with weekend life, but Amara didn't hear it. She walked down Commerce Street, each step more deliberate than the last. In her head, the conversation replayed in loops. Not the words exactly, those were easy to forget. It was the tone, the disgust, the way Whitmore said you like she was less than a citizen, less than a person. By the time she reached her apartment, she felt like she was wearing someone else's skin. She turned on her lamp, peeled off her uniform, and stood in front of the mirror. She stared at herself, long and hard, at her deep brown eyes, at her cheekbones that mirrored her mother's, at the hair tied too tightly for comfort. Then she whispered what her mother used to say when she got bullied in middle school. You are not small. They just don't know how to see big things. On the wall behind her hung a pinned sheet of paper, handwritten, slightly wrinkled. She had written it years ago after her first failed French oral exam. It read, "Speak truth, walk silent, change everything." Amara sat on the edge of her bed and stared at those words. For the first time, she questioned whether silence had protected her or just made her easier to dismiss. She hadn't yelled, she hadn't disrespected anyone. She had simply answered her mother in a language she loved, a language she had worked hard to master. And yet, it had been enough to threaten someone like Whitmore, enough to cost her something. The weight of it settled slowly, like dust after a storm. She didn't know it yet, but that moment, that quiet, shame-coated, invisible moment would become the first crack in a wall far older and taller than she realized. A wall built from assumptions, powered by money, and defended by silence. But something inside her had shifted. A shadow had stirred. A line had been crossed. And Amara Johnson was no longer content to be a ghost. The morning after the French phone call, the air felt different. Amara arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early. As always, she tied her apron with practiced precision, tucked in her shirt, and greeted her co-workers, most of whom nodded absently or didn't look up from their phones. She felt something unspoken in the way they looked at her. Not hostility, not sympathy, something in between. like they'd heard a whisper, but didn't want to be seen reacting to it. Before she could reach the dining room, her manager called out from the office, "Amara." Got a second. She stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind her. On the desk was a single sheet of paper, typed, folded, neatly placed. Her manager didn't look her in the eyes. "I'm going to get straight to it," he said. "This is your termination notice." Her breath caught in her chest. "For what?" He scratched his cheek, avoiding her gaze. "We've received complaints. Last night, Mr. Whitmore was offended by your behavior." Amara stared at him. "By speaking to my mother." He flinched slightly. He felt uncomfortable. "He's a long-term VIP. I'm just the messenger here." She reached out and picked up the paper. Her hands didn't shake. "Not yet. Let me be clear," she said, voice low and calm. "I served every table. I followed every rule. I spoke to my mother for 15 seconds. In French. Quietly." He shrugged. "This place isn't about fairness. It's about comfort. And the people who pay to be comfortable." A silence hung in the air, thick and sour. Then Amara nodded once, slowly, and folded the paper into her purse. "Thanks for your honesty," she said, and walked out. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't slam the door. She didn't cry. But outside, the sunlight felt sharper, the city louder, and for the first time, the words her mother had once whispered to her felt like a dare, not comfort. Sometimes, silence is dignity. And sometimes, silence is surrender. Amara didn't go home right away. She wandered through the campus of Southern Methodist University, where the buildings stood tall and tidy, their bricks too clean, their windows too clear as if injustice couldn't reach past the landscaping. She walked until her feet hurt, until the pain grounded her more than any breath could. By late afternoon, she found herself in her favorite corner of the university library tucked between Francophone, post-colonial studies, and comparative linguistics. It smelled like old paper and possibility. She opened her laptop and stared at the blank screen. Her scholarship application to a graduate program in Paris was due in 6 days. She had planned to write about literary translation and cultural nuance, but now her mind burned with a different kind of language, the unspoken vocabulary of humiliation. She started to type. "I am not submitting this application because I feel prepared. I am submitting it because I refuse to disappear." Each sentence poured out like a confession and a declaration rolled into one. She wrote about what it meant to be fluent in 3 languages and still voiceless in your own city. She wrote about being punished not for being wrong, but for being seen. She wrote about the weight of swallowing your dignity to survive and the toll it takes on the soul. When she hit save, she leaned back in her chair, exhausted. She hadn't written what she planned. She had written what was true. Later that night, she walked home in the dark. Her phone buzzed a notification from the restaurant's internal group chat. She opened it instinctively. New schedule posted. Amara Johnson removed from shift rotation. No call, no meeting, no explanation, just digital confirmation of erasure. She turned off her phone and stared up at the sky. The stars above Dallas didn't shine as brightly as the ones in her childhood books, but they were still there. Still distant, still real. Her stomach tightened, not from fear, but clarity. They weren't just trying to silence her, they were trying to erase her. And now she had a choice. Let them, or respond not in anger, but in presence. Amara sat quietly in her apartment, a warm light from her desk lamp spilling across the cluttered table. Her black server apron was still folded over the back of her chair. She hadn't touched it since the morning. She didn't need to. It was no longer hers. She turned on her laptop and opened a blank document. At the top, she typed, "When silence feeds power." She sat for a moment, thinking. Not just about the job, but about the way her voice had been dismissed, not because she said something wrong, but because she said something at all. Then, slowly, she began to write. In America, language is more than communication. It's identity. It's freedom. It's power. But not everyone is allowed to use it. Not in every room. Not with every face watching. Her fingers moved faster now. When I answered my mother in French, I wasn't being dramatic. I wasn't breaking a rule. I was honoring my family, my education, and myself. But that was enough to offend someone who wanted me small, silent, and servile. She stopped, took a breath, then continued. This isn't just about a job I lost. It's about space who's allowed to take it, and who's punished for simply existing inside it. She sat back. Her chest felt lighter. She hadn't written what was expected. She had written what was true. Just then, a soft chime rang out from her phone. A new email. The subject line was simple about what happened last night. Amara hesitated, then tapped to open it. "Hi, Amara. I was there last night. My name is Alice. I'm Charles Whitmore's daughter. I heard the whole thing. You didn't do anything wrong. You were graceful. My father was out of line. And truthfully, I think you're someone I can trust. Would you be willing to meet? I have something I need your help with." Amara stared at the message. No cold formality, no corporate tone, just words, honest ones. She didn't reply right away, but for the first time all day she smiled. Not because it fixed anything, but because it meant she had been seen. 3 days had passed since the email. 3 days of wondering whether to respond, and 3 days of asking herself why this stranger, the daughter of the man who had humiliated her, would want to talk. Now, Amara sat across from Alice at a modest cafe on the edge of campus. No crystal chandeliers, no white tablecloths, just worn wooden booths and the smell of strong coffee. Alice was already there when Amara arrived, 10 minutes early, hair pulled back, dressed plainly, but not without care. She looked up and gave a small, sincere smile. Not the kind that tries too hard, just enough to say, "Thank you for coming." Amara sat down slowly, keeping her coat on. Her body was there, but her trust was still in motion. "Thanks for meeting me," Alice said. Her voice was soft, uncertain. Amara tilted her head slightly. "Let's get to the part where you tell me why." Alice hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a slim folder, worn at the edges. She placed it between them on the table like a fragile truth. "I'm working on a research project for my degree, international business law, but some of the materials I've been given don't add up. My father's company is preparing a joint venture with a firm in France, and these documents, they're not just contracts. Some of them are coded, buried in legal phrasing." She tapped the folder gently. "I need help translating them. Not just the language, the meaning." Amara didn't reach for the folder yet. She looked Alice in the eye. "You do know who I am, right?" Alice nodded. "You're the one my father tried to silence." "That's right," Amara said. "And now you want me to help you clean up his mess?" Alice didn't back down. "No, I want your eyes on it because you don't owe him anything. You're the only person in this whole situation who has nothing to gain from lying. It wasn't an apology, but it was close enough to honesty." Finally, Amara picked up the folder. She flipped through the first few pages, columns of numbers, footnotes in French, phrases that made her stomach tighten. She closed the folder. Her voice was quiet but firm. "I'll read it, but I'm not doing this for you." Alice nodded. I wouldn't expect you to. And with that, the power dynamic shifted quietly, but unmistakably. Amara sat at her kitchen table for hours. The folders spread open in front of her like a map of buried secrets. The papers weren't just legal documents. They were carefully constructed walls, hiding names, hiding money, hiding decisions that hurt people on the other side of the world. But to Amara, every phrase meant something, every footnote, every adjusted figure, every silent space between the lines. She could feel what they were meant to conceal. She circled a line that made her pause consulting expenses, redirected through a shell company in Luxembourg. Nearly 4 million euros. And in another document land acquisition agreements in West Africa, where entire farming communities were being bought out under fake development clauses. She leaned back and whispered to herself, "This isn't a misunderstanding. This is strategy." When she emailed Alice her notes, she kept it short. "This isn't about a class project. This is organized exploitation. Are you okay?" Alice wrote back fast. "No, but I'm recording everything, every meeting, every call." Amara sat with that message. She didn't feel heroic. She felt exposed. But for once, she wasn't standing alone in the dark. Then came the shift. 2 days later, Amara's phone buzzed with a news alert. Someone had posted a translation online, her exact words, lifted straight from the memo she'd worked on. No credit, no context. It appeared on a finance forum under the title Corruption Inside the Whitmore Empire. At first, she froze. Had Alice leaked it, or had someone hacked into her files? The post exploded. Dozens of comments, questions, outrage, denials, and then, quietly, it turned personal. One user asked, "Who even translated this garbage?" Another answered, "Heard it was some waitress. Fired for running her mouth in French." Amara stared at the screen. She didn't need them to say her name. She saw herself in those words. And she felt what they were doing chipping away at her, turning her voice into a joke, dismissing her as some angry black girl who talked too much. She turned off the phone, sat in silence. Outside, traffic hummed and someone laughed down the hall. Inside, her hands were clenched in her lap. They didn't fear her because she lied. They feared her because she told the truth in a voice they thought didn't matter. And that meant she had already won something. She looked down at the papers again. Then she whispered, almost like a promise to herself, "If they think that post was loud, they haven't heard me yet." The next morning, Amara woke to a dozen missed calls. Some were from unknown numbers. A few were from reporters, but the most surprising one came from her academic advisor, someone who had barely said more than 2 words to her in the last year. She didn't answer any of them. She just sat in bed, her back pressed against the wall, the phone buzzing on the sheets beside her like a live wire. The leak had gone viral overnight. Someone, not her, not Alice, had pushed it further. A full blog post now circulated across activist websites, quoting her translation. They called it an anonymous act of whistleblowing, connecting the memo to Whitmore's known political ties and shady land deals abroad. Amara hadn't even spoken. But suddenly, the world was listening, and then came the twist. Her university sent her an official email. Subject line: Academic Inquiry Request. Urgent response required. They wanted a meeting to discuss the potential misuse of proprietary material and concerns about academic integrity. That's how they framed it. Not the content, not the corruption, but whether she had violated some blurry policy about working on materials without appropriate disclosure. It was clear what this was: a warning shot. She was no longer just a student. She was a liability, and when powerful people feel threatened, they don't care if you were right. They just want you quiet. Amara stared at the email for a long time. Then she got dressed, made tea, and walked to campus. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She didn't bring a lawyer, just a folder, and the truth. Inside the small conference room, 3 faculty members sat behind a table, all white, all older, all wearing polite discomfort like pressed suits. The lead administrator adjusted his glasses. "We're not here to make accusations." "Miss Johnson," he began, "we just want to understand your involvement in recent online activity." Amara didn't flinch. She opened her folder, slid a printed copy of the memo across the table, and spoke clearly. "This is what I translated. It's real. And if you're asking whether I had permission to tell the truth, then maybe you need to rethink what kind of truth this university is teaching." No one spoke for several seconds. Then she stood. "If you decide to punish me for that," she added, "you'll be proving exactly why people like me stop speaking." And she walked out, not fast, not afraid, just steady. The hallway felt quiet as she stepped into it. Not the silence of shame, but of strength. Something inside her had broken free, and for the first time, Amara realized. The people who tried to humiliate her had only given her a louder stage. Amara sat on a park bench near campus, her folder resting in her lap, the morning sun struggling to cut through the weight in her chest. It had been 2 days since the university meeting, 2 days since she stood her ground. But instead of feeling lighter, she felt watched. Not in the obvious way. No one followed her, no one called her out in the hallways. But there were glances now, hesitations. Professors who suddenly became too busy to meet. Classmates who used to smile now looked away. It wasn't rejection, it was retreat, like people were pulling their hands off something radioactive. She scrolled through her messages. One stood out from Alice. "We need to talk. Urgent. Meet tonight. No explanation. No details. Just that." Amara stared at the screen. She hesitated. Then typed where, later that evening, they met again. Same cafe, same table. But this time, Alice looked different, not just tired, rattled. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone and laid it face down on the table. "My father knows," she said quietly. Amara blinked. "How?" Alice nodded toward the phone. "He confronted me, not directly, but in his way. He asked about my project, mentioned the forum leak, said some things that made it clear he's watching everything." Amara's spine stiffened. "You think he knows I helped?" "I don't think," Alice said. "I know, and he's not going to let this go." The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of fear. Alice leaned in closer. "There's something else," she whispered. "Something I haven't told you." She reached into her coat and pulled out a flash drive. "This has everything," she said. "Internal memos, off-the-record audio, contracts signed in fake names. I've been collecting it for months, not for school, for myself." Amara didn't move. She didn't touch the drive. Alice looked down. "At first, I just wanted to know if he was as bad as people said. Now, I know. He's worse." "Why me?" Amara asked. Alice's voice cracked. "Because you don't owe him anything. Because you didn't grow up under his roof pretending lies were normal. And because I can't do this alone." Amara finally reached for the flash drive. Her fingers closed around it gently. "You know, if we move forward with this," she said, "there's no going back." Alice nodded. "I'm already gone." Amara looked at her, and for the first time saw not the daughter of a billionaire, but someone else entirely. Someone just as trapped, just as desperate to break free. And suddenly, she didn't feel alone anymore. The next morning, Amara plugged the flash drive into her laptop. Her heart pounded as the files loaded dozens of folders, hundreds of documents, audio files labeled with initials, and scanned signatures from contracts that made no sense until they did. One memo caught her eye immediately. It was a chain of internal emails between Whitmore and several executives, discussing revenue offsets and geopolitical delays, but buried in one of the attachments was a spreadsheet. Dates, figures, coded references to land assets in developing nations. One entry read reclassification agricultural mineral rights, partner compliant. It wasn't just unethical, it was theft. Amara leaned closer, trying to decode every term. These weren't just business documents, they were weapons, and they were being used on people who had no idea they were part of the game. She opened an audio file. The voice was unmistakable Charles Whitmore. "Keep the numbers clean, keep it offshore, and don't put my name on anything that gets sent to Brussels. I don't care if they scream we own the dirt under their homes now." Amara froze. The words hit like a brick to the chest. This wasn't corporate cruelty. This was colonization in a tailored suit. She felt a rage growing in her chest, not loud, not blinding, but steady. The kind of heat that doesn't burn out, the kind that builds. By afternoon, she had sent the first batch of files to Alice encrypted, backed up, hidden behind layers of protection. Then she made copies. One for herself, one she placed in a sealed envelope, tucked inside a novel on her bookshelf, labeled only with a note in case something happens. And still, she didn't feel safe. She turned off the lights, pulled the curtains, and sat in silence. Her phone buzzed, a blocked number. She let it ring, then another, then a text. "You're making a mistake. Walk away, no name, no signature." But the message was clear. Someone knew, and they weren't bluffing. That night, Amara couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboard made her sit up. Every headlight passing outside painted new shadows on her walls. But she didn't cry. She didn't panic. She grabbed a notebook and began to write, not out of fear, but clarity. She wrote everything she knew, every file, every quote, every threat. Because if someone was going to come for her, they would not be the only ones with a story to tell, and she would not go quietly. Amara arrived early to the library, wearing a plain hoodie and jeans. No makeup, no laptop bag. Just a single flash drive tucked into her pocket, and a paperback novel clutched in her hand, a decoy, but also comfort. She found a quiet table near the back, far from the windows. She wasn't sure if anyone was watching, but part of her no longer cared. She opened the book, slid the flash drive inside, and closed it. Then she waited. 10 minutes later, the journalist arrived. A woman in her 40s with a tired face and calm eyes. She walked with the posture of someone who'd seen too many people try to lie. She didn't introduce herself, not out loud, just nodded once and sat down. Amara slid the book across the table. "No names," she said softly. The woman opened the book, nodded again, and didn't ask questions. It was done in 5 minutes. The journalist left through the rear exit. Amara stayed behind, letting her pulse settle. She watched the light filter in through the blinds, slow and quiet, like truth creeping into a locked room. Later that day, the first article appeared. It didn't name names, it didn't shout, but it said enough. It described the shell companies, offshore accounts, rigged development bids, and internal communications all linked to a major U.S. energy conglomerate with active ties to land displacement in Africa and Europe. The report was factual, measured, devastating, and within hours, it caught fire. Anonymous sources began sharing more files. Leaks flowed like water from a cracked dam. Financial watchdog groups started independent investigations, and a quiet tension began to rise in places Amara had never even heard of. She had expected fear, panic, maybe even guilt, but what she felt most was stillness, a kind of quiet that only comes when the noise around you can no longer drown out the truth. That evening, her phone rang again. Blocked number. She let it go to voicemail, then it rang again. This time, it was Alice. Amara answered. "They know," Alice said quickly. "And they're angry, but they're scared too." Amara nodded slowly. "Good." Alice's voice softened. "How are you?" Amara looked out the window, watched the city blink in the distance. "I'm not hiding anymore," she said. "I may not be safe, but I'm not small, and I'm not sorry." There was silence on the other end. Then, quietly, Alice said, "Neither am I." They didn't talk long after that. They didn't need to. Because something had shifted not just in the story, but in themselves. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. The world didn't change overnight. But Amara could feel something shifting, like the first crack of light through a thick wall. Everywhere she went, there was a different kind of silence now. Not the silence of dismissal, she knew that one well, but the silence that comes when people don't know how to respond, when they've seen a truth they can't unsee and don't yet know if they should look away or lean in. On campus, some students avoided eye contact. Others looked at her like she was a headline come to life. Professors glanced up when she walked in, then quickly back at their papers. Even the woman in the campus cafe who used to smile but never ask her name now called her Miss Johnson. It was strange. She hadn't spoken on the record. She hadn't given any interviews. But the story had moved faster than she could, and somehow people knew. They knew she had helped expose something dark. They just didn't know what it would cost her yet. Alice was the only one who kept in regular contact. Every night they shared updates. Alice was monitoring legal threads, watching for subpoenas, listening in on hushed meetings at her father's estate. She had become both insider and traitor, and the burden showed. "I'm being followed," Alice said during one of their late-night calls, or watched, I can't tell which, but something's changed. They're closing ranks. Amara leaned back in her chair. "They're scared. They should be." Alice paused. "And are you okay?" Amara didn't answer right away. She glanced around her tiny apartment, the stack of translated documents still on her desk, her scholarship application left unfinished, the job she'd lost, the trust she'd fought to rebuild. "I'm not sure," she said softly. "But I'm awake now, and I can't pretend I'm not." That night, Amara began organizing everything. Not just the files, but the timeline, the quotes, the statements from insiders who had messaged her anonymously since the story broke. She labeled folders, built backups, encrypted them, printed hard copies. She wasn't just reacting anymore, she was preparing. Because she could feel it coming, not just attention, but retaliation. The kind that doesn't announce itself with words, but with shadows. And she wouldn't be caught off guard again. The world had wanted her quiet, but now she was methodical. Now she was watching them. And in the stillness of that night, she realized something terrifying and empowering at once. The story wasn't about them anymore. It was about her. And she was no longer the ghost in the crowd. She was the shadow they couldn't control. 2 days after the leak, A second article appeared. This one had names. Not full names. Not yet, but enough breadcrumbs to make the boardrooms nervous. Phrases like a prominent Dallas energy firm and the daughter of an executive were woven in alongside more detailed dates of the land transfers, inconsistencies in public filings, direct quotes from memos that only someone on the inside could have provided. Amara read it 3 times. Each word felt heavier than the last. Because she hadn't spoken to any journalist, neither had Alice. But the evidence was out now, moving faster than either of them had planned. Someone else had joined the fight. That night, Alice called. "They're scrambling," she said. "My father canceled 3 meetings in one day. His assistant looked like she hadn't slept in a week. I think they know it's all unraveling." Amara stayed quiet on the line. She didn't celebrate. She didn't exhale. Not yet. Because sometimes the most dangerous part of an avalanche is the quiet before the final slide. "I'm being watched again," Alice continued. "But it's worse now. They don't care if I notice. It's like they want me to feel it." Amara nodded slowly. "They want you to be afraid." Alice paused, then said softly, "It's working." That admission stung more than Amara expected. She wanted to say something comforting, something strong, but the truth was she was afraid too. Every day now felt like standing in the middle of a cracked bridge. You never knew which step would send the whole thing down. Later that night, Amara did something she hadn't done in months. She opened a blank document and wrote out everything not for class, not for court, but for herself. A timeline, a truth map. From the moment she picked up the phone at the restaurant, all the way to the latest threat that came as silence and stares. Each entry was short, factual, sharp like glass, because stories, she knew now, were more than just words. They were records, proof that you had lived through something when the world wanted to pretend you hadn't. Then she backed it all up. Twice. She hid a copy in her old language textbook, another in her landlord's safe box. She left no trail of where they went. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She was the archive. And if they tried to bury her, they'd find that she had already built her own monument, one made not of noise, but of silence. Sharp, clear, and unshakable. The following morning, Amara stepped out of her apartment and immediately noticed something was wrong. It wasn't loud, no broken window, no graffiti, nothing that screamed danger. It was subtler than that. Her mailbox was open. She never left it open. Inside, nothing had been taken, but someone had slid a piece of paper between the usual bills, a blank page, clean, folded once, no writing, no message, just presence. She stood there for a full minute. Then she closed the mailbox, locked it, and went back upstairs. She didn't call anyone. She didn't panic. She just sat at her kitchen table and thought. She knew this wasn't about curiosity anymore. This was a warning, or at least an invitation to feel watched, exposed, maybe even hunted. But instead of shrinking, something inside her lifted. They were watching her. Good. That meant they knew she was still moving. Later that afternoon, Alice sent a secure message. "It's happening. International regulators are requesting full audits. The board is in chaos." Then another message followed it. "Be careful. My father is no longer asking questions. He's looking for targets." Amara stared at the screen for a long time. She had already expected this. She closed her laptop and pulled out her notebook, the same one where she'd written every date, every moment, every turning point. She flipped to a blank page. At the top, she wrote, "If they try to erase me, read this," and she began to write in second person. You were never just a girl with a language degree. You were the storm they didn't see coming. You were the voice they told to stay quiet. And you answered with silence loud enough to shatter glass. The words poured out, not as a warning, not even as a legacy, but as proof. Proof that no matter what came next, she had chosen the fight. She had entered the fire, not because she was fearless, but because she had nothing left to lose. And in that space, she had found power, not the kind with microphones and headlines, the kind that lives in preparation, in knowledge, in truth that refuses to vanish. By the time the sun set, she had finished the page, then she folded it neatly, slid it into an envelope, and tucked it into the same drawer where she kept her passport and birth certificate. Not because she was planning to leave, but because she was ready for whatever tried to come in. They had shaken the wrong woman. The shadow had woken, and now it would never go back to sleep. The day everything cracked wide open started like any other. Amara was in the university library, headphones on, reviewing her thesis outline. It felt almost normal, just her books, and the low hum of student chatter, but beneath it all, something was shifting. She sensed it first in the eyes. People were looking at her not with confusion or judgment this time, but curiosity. Then came the whispers, soft, fast, like wind slipping through cracks. Her name, being said by mouths that didn't know her before last week. She took out her earbuds and checked her phone. There it was, a news alert. Whitmore Group faces federal probe. Internal whistleblower allegations surface. Her breath caught. The headline was vague, careful, but the article wasn't. It confirmed everything. Offshore transactions, land acquisitions under false titles, and at the heart of it, a set of documents linked to an anonymous linguistic consultant and a whistleblower close to the family. No names. But everyone who had been paying attention already knew who they meant. Amara's phone buzzed again. A call, unknown number. She let it ring. Then came a second alert. Her university email account had been locked. She froze. Her hands trembled as she opened her laptop and tried to log in. Denied. Then again. Denied. A third try. Still denied. A fourth. Her screen flashed red. Account suspended. Under administrative review. She stared at the screen. For a moment, her world tilted. Then a hand touched her shoulder. It was her academic advisor. "I'm sorry," he said. Quiet. Hesitant. "You've been placed on temporary leave. The board says it's to ensure safety and institutional neutrality during the investigation." Amara blinked slowly. "You mean they're removing me because I told the truth?" He didn't answer. He just looked at the floor. The fall hadn't come all at once. It came in whispers, shutdowns, polite words laced with fear. Amara walked out of the library. Her steps were steady, but her heart was screaming. She had lost her job, her academic access, her protection, and now she knew the system she had quietly believed in wasn't just flawed, it was complicit. Outside, the wind had picked up. A storm was forming over the city, clouds thick with warning. She zipped her coat, kept walking, not because she was fine, but because if they were going to take everything, she was going to make sure it wasn't quiet. Amara sat on the edge of her bed, her apartment dim with early evening light. The silence in the room was thick, not restful, not peaceful, just full of the weight of what she couldn't say, full of the things she'd lost over the last 48 hours. Her student account was locked. Her ID badge wouldn't scan at the library. The scholarship office hadn't returned her emails. Even her advisor, the one who had once praised her research, was no longer answering her texts. That afternoon, she had received a notice on her door. A polite letter, typed and signed, informing her that her housing, which had been covered by a student grant, was now under review. Payment was expected in full by the end of the week. Amara knew what that meant. They weren't just locking her out, they were pushing her out. She placed the letter on the table next to her and stared at it like it might burst into flames. Part of her wanted to scream. Part of her wanted to laugh. Mostly, she just wanted to understand how quickly the world could erase someone, how people who had called her brilliant and driven last month now wouldn't even say her name. She called Alice. "I think they want me gone by Friday." Alice sighed into the phone. "They've started freezing my access to files. One of my father's assistants asked me if I was still welcome at home, like I'm a guest now. You okay? I don't know." Amara leaned her head against the wall. Same. There was a pause. Long. Real. Then Alice said, "Do you think we did the right thing?" Amara didn't answer right away. She looked around her apartment, the half-packed boxes, the paper trail, the flicker of her phone screen still glowing from another blocked call. "I don't think the right thing ever feels safe," she said finally. "But I know we didn't lie." Later that night, someone slid an envelope under her door. No name. Inside was a photo. It showed her walking on campus, time-stamped 2 days ago, taken from behind, slightly to the right. She was holding her bag, wearing headphones, completely unaware. On the back, written in sharp ink, "You're not built for this." Amara read it once, then again. She folded the paper, ripped it slowly down the middle, and burned it over her kitchen sink. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. Instead, she picked up her pen, opened her notebook, and wrote 4 words on a blank page. "Watch me keep going." Because even if they were closing every door around her, she still had the key they feared the most. She wasn't scared of the dark anymore. The next morning, Amara walked into the university's administrative building not because she expected justice, but because she was done waiting for permission to exist. She wore the same clothes from the night before. No makeup, no earrings, just a plain black sweatshirt and her mother's gold bracelet on her wrist, the only thing she owned that felt like armor. She had no appointment, no invitation, but she didn't need one. The receptionist looked up, startled. "Do you have a meeting?" "No," Amara said calmly. "I have a right to know why I've been silenced." A moment passed. Then the woman, without arguing, picked up the phone and whispered into the receiver. A few minutes later, a man in a gray blazer opened the frosted door and gestured Amara inside. It was a small room. Clean, sterile. 3 people at a table. 2 of them had already read the files on her. The third was there to read her face. "We're conducting an internal inquiry," one began. "Until it concludes, your student status and housing benefits have been paused." "Paused," Amara repeated. "Not revoked, temporarily suspended," he corrected. Glancing at his notes, she looked at each of them, slowly, without blinking. "I've followed every rule this institution has laid out. I've never cheated. I've never misused resources. And I've never asked for more than what I earned." No one responded. She leaned forward slightly. "So let me ask you, is the real issue what I did, or is it that I did it out loud?" Still no answer. They weren't here to listen. They were here to wait her out. Finally, Amara stood. "Thank you for your time," she said flatly. She didn't slam the door. She didn't cry in the hallway. She walked straight outside, into the wind, into the open. It was over. Whatever part of her still believed in that system had been stripped away, but what remained was unshakable. She sat on a bench under a wide oak tree, pulled out her notebook, and turned to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote, "The day I stopped waiting." She wrote about the meeting, the silence, the fear disguised as professionalism, the way they had tried to wrap her erasure in policy language and procedural words. She didn't write it to remember. She wrote it so no one could ever say it didn't happen. And then she sent it to Alice, to the journalist, to 3 student newspapers. She didn't wait for permission, or feedback, or permission again. She hit send, then closed her phone, because she knew now the fall they tried to orchestrate was the ground she needed to rise. A week later, Amara stood backstage in the university's main auditorium. The student council had invited her to speak not because the administration wanted her there, but because the students insisted. The event was called Voices Unmuted, and her name, for the first time in this space, was printed at the top of the flyer. She didn't know what she was going to say. She had notes, crumpled ones, a printed page with a draft she didn't feel connected to anymore. None of it felt big enough. None of it felt honest enough. What do you say to a room full of people who watched you fall and now want to call it strength? The crowd was large, too large. Professors in the back rows, journalists near the side aisles, students packed into the center, some of them curious, some of them skeptical. A few, she could tell, were waiting for her to fail to crack, to sound unsure, to backpedal. She felt it all. And she walked out anyway. No introduction, no music. Just her steps and the microphone. She stood in silence for a moment, looking at them. Then she leaned forward and spoke. "I wasn't supposed to be here." The room went still. I was supposed to disappear quietly. A scholarship revocation. A locked student account. A vague academic review. That's how it usually works. Right? A few murmurs. One person nodded, solemnly. I was told I wasn't built for this, that my voice didn't belong in the conversation, that my language, my literal mother tongue, was a disruption. She looked around the room, direct, unshaking. And maybe it was. A pause. Maybe the truth is disruptive. Maybe that's the point. She stepped back, let the silence settle, then continued. I didn't ask to be part of this fight. I didn't plan to lose my job, my home, my sense of safety. But when you see something broken and you stay quiet, that's not safety. That's surrender. She didn't shout. She didn't preach. She just said it as it had lived in her simple, steady, and full of quiet fire. I've learned that power doesn't always look like a podium or a paycheck. Sometimes, power is a refusal to be erased, a decision to stay visible when it's easier to disappear. She ended with a line her mother used to say, one she had almost forgotten until now. When they close the door, speak through the keyhole. When they take the key, write on the wall. And then she stepped back. No applause at first, just stillness, then one clap, then another. Then the sound rose until it filled the room, but she didn't smile. Because the lesson wasn't about applause, it was about being heard. After the speech, Amara walked backstage into the quiet, her breath still catching in her chest. The applause had faded, but something deeper remained, a stillness, a weight. She didn't know if she had said everything she needed to, but she knew she hadn't held back. That was new. She leaned against the wall, letting herself just exist. No mask, no need to measure her words. For once, She didn't have to shrink to fit the space. Then a voice broke the silence. Amara, she turned. A student, maybe 19, stood with a notebook clutched tight against his chest. Nervous. He looked like he had rehearsed his steps a dozen times before crossing the hallway to find her. He started, voice trembling. I wanted to say thank you. For that? She gave a small nod. Thanks for being here. He looked down, then up again. I'm from Senegal. I speak Wolof and French. I used to hide it, like it was something I had to apologize for. Amara felt her throat tighten. You reminded me it's not. She didn't respond right away. She just placed a hand lightly on his shoulder and said, You don't owe anyone an apology for where you come from or how you sound when you speak the truth. He nodded, eyes wet. Then he turned and disappeared into the flow of students. She walked outside alone. The air was crisp. The city glowed in the distance. And for the first time in weeks, Amara didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was beginning. Back in her apartment, she sat on the floor, surrounded by documents, books, Post-it notes, the remnants of everything she had gathered over the last chaotic month. Her phone buzzed with messages, congratulations, invitations, even media requests. She ignored them all. She reached for her notebook, the one with all her handwritten thoughts, her fears, her fire. She turned to a clean page and began to write, Power doesn't always wear a suit. Sometimes it wears silence, sometimes it wears scars, but when it finally speaks, it changes everything. She paused, then underlined that last sentence twice. Then her email pinged. A message from the editor of the campus newspaper. We want to feature your full story, your words, your framing, no edits. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then she typed, Let's do it. But don't call it an exposé. Call it what it is, a reclamation. She hit send, closed her laptop, and breathed. Not because the battle was over, but because she was no longer fighting for a voice. She was fighting with one. The next day, Amara sat across from the campus newspaper editor, a small, quiet woman with large glasses and the kind of curiosity that didn't demand, just invited. They sat in a corner of the student media room, between stacks of archived issues and the soft hum of an old heater. The room felt like a time capsule. Faded, focused, safe. I won't ask questions, the editor said gently. You've already told the story. I just want to make sure you're the one who gets to tell it again. Amara nodded, grateful. She handed over her pages. Typed, yes, but not edited to please. No smoothing, no filters, just truth. Raw, direct. It began with the phone call in the restaurant. It moved through the firing, the silence, the folder Alice handed her, the leak, the warning photo. And the moment she realized the world wasn't going to save her, so she had to save herself. It ended with one simple line. They tried to erase me. Instead, I left a mark. The editor didn't speak for a long moment after reading it. Then she said, This will go in full. First page, cover story. Amara didn't smile, but something inside her exhaled. Later that night, she walked through campus, no headphones, no hoodie pulled tight, just herself, visible. And when someone stared, she didn't look down. When someone whispered, she didn't flinch. She walked by the admin building, the one that locked her out, and kept going, past the library, past the cafe where Alice first gave her the folder, past the fountain where she once sat invisible, shrinking in the shadow of institutions that didn't know how to carry her truth. She stopped at the main quad and looked up at the old brick bell tower. not because it meant anything grand, but because it had stood longer than any of them. Through scandals, silence, shifts in leadership, it had stood. So would she. Back in her room, she placed her published piece next to her notebook, the one full of scribbles. Late-night thoughts. Pain turned purpose. She didn't reread it. She didn't need to, because she remembered every word, every pause, every page she had once been afraid to turn. The lesson wasn't in the paper. It was in her posture now, the way she held herself, the way she no longer waited to be asked, the way she no longer whispered. Not every fight ends with applause. Sometimes the lesson is that you stood at all. 1 year later, Amara walked across the quad of her old university not as a student, not as an activist, not even as a whistleblower, but as a guest. She had been invited to speak at the Student Leadership Summit. The same auditorium that once felt too big for her voice now held her name in bold letters on a digital welcome banner. She wore a black hoodie, not to hide, but to remember. The same hoodie she wore the day she was fired. The day she walked out of the admin building after being silenced. The day she realized that being invisible had never been her choice, only the comfort of others. She walked past students who stared. Some recognized her, some whispered. But most didn't say anything at all. And that was fine, because this time, she wasn't looking for recognition. She was carrying something different. She walked into the auditorium through the side entrance not because she had to, but because she preferred quiet. As she stepped backstage, a young event coordinator approached her. Nervous, wide-eyed. "Miss Johnson, we're so honored to have you here." Amara smiled softly. "Thank you," she said, "but I'm just here to speak my part." The young woman nodded. "Would you like us to introduce you with your title or no title?" Amara said gently. "Just my name, on stage." The lights felt softer this time. The microphone wasn't cold. When she stepped up to it, she didn't bring notes, didn't bring a script. She just stood there, hoodie on, chin up, eyes steady, and said, "There was a time I thought survival meant shrinking, that if I could just stay small enough, I'd be left alone. But silence doesn't protect us. It only protects the people who want us silent." She let the words sit, not for applause, but because they were true. She looked out at the faces, some young, eager, others skeptical, guarded, and she said, "I didn't come back to tell you I won. I didn't win. I lost things. I lost comfort. I lost ease. I lost people. But I found something better. I found out what my voice can carry. And now I walk with it." And then she stepped back. She didn't need more, because the room was already listening. And when she walked off stage, not rushed, not flustered, she didn't look back. Because the hoodie wasn't hiding her anymore. It was honoring the journey. After the talk, Amara stepped out of the auditorium alone. She didn't linger. She didn't wait for congratulations. She didn't pose for pictures. The speech wasn't a performance. It was a marker. A moment where the old world and the new one touched, and she simply chose to keep walking forward. The sidewalk was cracked and uneven in places. The wind tugged at the edge of her hoodie, but she didn't pull it tighter, she let it move. Across the quad, a group of students sat beneath the oak tree near the library, the same place she used to hide during lunch breaks, pretending to study when really she was just trying to feel less invisible. One of the students, a black girl maybe a few years younger than Amara, looked up and locked eyes with her. She didn't say anything, but she nodded. Amara nodded back. That was enough. That evening, she went to her favorite quiet spot downtown, a small bookstore cafe that had once refused to carry her student flyers. This time, the staff recognized her. Not as a name, not as a symbol, but as a regular. She ordered chamomile tea and took a seat by the window. She pulled out her journal, the same one from months ago, and flipped through the pages. Anger, fear, details, documents, quotes. All the words she had written to keep herself anchored while everything around her was trying to push her out to sea. Now, those pages didn't hurt to read. They felt earned. She turned to a blank page. At the top, she wrote, "I don't need revenge, I need growth." Then beneath it, "Let them forget my name. Let them misquote my words. Let them pretend I disappeared. But they will always remember that I spoke when it mattered." She smiled softly. Not because she was proud in a loud way, but because she knew who she was now. Not the ghost in the crowd. Not the girl with a target on her back. Not the symbol. Just Amara, whole. Standing. Walking forward. She closed the journal, sipped her tea. And when a message came through from a human rights group in France, inviting her to consult on language and equity policy, she didn't scream, or jump, or call anyone right away. She just smiled again, because the work she'd done wasn't about exposure. It was about restoration. And now, for the first time in a long time, she felt free enough to choose what came next. A week after her return to campus, Amara packed her bags. Not because she was escaping, but because she was choosing. The invitation from the French Human Rights Organization had turned into a formal offer, a year-long fellowship in Paris, focused on language, justice, and policy. They had read her story. They didn't ask for credentials, they asked for clarity. She was ready. As she zipped her suitcase closed, she looked around the apartment she'd fought to keep. It was quiet. Sunlight spilled across the floor. Nothing dramatic, nothing symbolic, just a room, just space. And she had claimed it. She left the notebook on the desk, not forgotten, but full. It had done its job. At the airport, she wore the hoodie, not to make a point, but because it was hers. At the gate, a young flight attendant paused as she scanned Amara's ticket. She looked at the embroidered words on the sleeve, a simple stitch Amara had added months ago, after everything had happened. It read, "Silent Power." The attendant smiled. "That's strong." Amara nodded. "It has to be. On the plane." She sat by the window, not staring out, but breathing in, no fear, no pretense, just forward. As the wheels left the ground, she closed her eyes and remembered. She remembered the restaurant, the accusation, the dismissal. She remembered the look in Alice's eyes when she handed over the flash drive. She remembered the silence after her student account was locked, the photo, the fear, the rage, the decision to fight back. But more than all of that, she remembered what it felt like to speak, not to shout, not to perform, but to speak, to say, "I am here, I am whole, I am not asking anymore." Hours later, in a new city. She stepped out of the terminal. Paris smelled different, older, wider, but not unfamiliar, because she had carried her voice across an ocean and it still fit perfectly in her chest. As she walked into her new chapter, one phrase repeated in her mind like a heartbeat. "They tried to silence me. They failed." Because silence isn't the absence of noise, it's the presence of power. And with each step, Amara didn't just walk. She carried the thousands who had once whispered, once waited, once watched from the sidelines. Now, they were walking too. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person to stand still long enough for others to realize they can move. And with that, the hoodie walked on. And that is the story of silent power, of a young black woman who stood tall in a world designed to shrink her. Amara didn't fight back with fists. She fought back with her mind, her truth, and her refusal to disappear. And in doing so, she gave voice to so many others who have been told to stay small. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us bring more powerful stories of empathy, justice, and silent strength to life. Your support is what fuels this journey. Let's keep standing together and rising higher, one story at a time. Stay safe and inspired.